Right, welcome back to the kitchen. Just taking out today's recipe so you can have a look at it to begin with. So here we have our Kumara and potato bake. Probably quite a classic New Zealand dish. You can now buy lots of sauces in the supermarket to make it easier for you to make your own at home, but to me it's just as easy to actually make it from scratch if you have a bit of planning, and a great dish again for our cooking for teenagers to actually have an experiment with in the kitchen at home and actually make something that's really cool, really nice to eat and quite easy in the scheme of things. So we'll set that aside for the moment and let's get into it. So on my stove already I've got a pot. We're going to make our good old white sauce again. So as you can see, we're building on some of the skills we've learnt previous. I've also got a fry pan on. I'm heating up a wee bit of oil and you'll see what I'm going to do with that in a few minutes. So again, our white sauce is revision, as I'm a teacher we would say, so we're going to revise how we make our white sauce. So in our pot we're going to melt that butter. So I'm just going to let that do its thing quite happily. In my other fry pan, which I'm starting to heat up, I'm going to fry off some sliced onion, which I've just pre-sliced, and some diced bacon. So I'm going to pop that into the fry pan now as well. No, I won't, because it's not quite hot enough, so we'll let that heat up. But what I've done ahead of time is I've pre-cooked the kumara and the potato. So I've basically peeled the kumara, cut it into large sized chunks, the same with the potato, peeled them, cut them into good sized chunks, and all I did was boil them in some boiling salted water till they were just cooked, not so they were going to be mashed, so there's still some texture in there. So they're firm, but they actually are cooked. So I've chosen a nice white dish here that I can put my cooked potato and kumara into, and they're going to cover the base quite happily. So that's our first step. I've also got some fresh homemade breadcrumbs. Now these are what we call fresh breadcrumbs, so it's basically taking bread that you buy or you make yourself, and all you're doing is putting the sliced bread with the crusts on into a food processor and processing it down. So it's not like a dried breadcrumb that you buy in the supermarket, they've actually been toasted. So we actually want that texture of that fresh crumb. So back to our stove. So my butter has melted, in goes my flour, and we're going to mix that flour, so we're making that roux, that equal quantities of fat and flour. My oil's starting to heat up, so in goes our onions and bacon, and all we're doing is basically getting a bit of the flavour out of our onion and bacon. We don't want to burn them or fry the bacon till it's real crispy, we just want to cook it off. So as I've said before, we take out our wooden spoon, in goes our milk, and I'm also just going to add a wee bit of extra milk today, it can go in, and then we might change over to our whisk, because we want to whisk that milk into our butter and flour so it will not have any lumps. Now there's a wee bit of saltiness with our bacon, but when we're making a dish like this, which with our white sauce and our potatoes, it needs a wee bit of seasoning. So we want to make sure we put some salt into our white sauce, so a generous pinch, and I'm also going to do a little grind of pepper as well. So that's starting to do its thing. So as you can see, I'm just cooking down the bacon and the onion. It's not browning off, I'm still on a high heat, but I'm keeping an eye on it. Now we also need to go into our sauce today. We're going to turn our white sauce, which we've been learning to make, actually into a cheese sauce. So we're actually going to add some grated cheese to that. So it's going to make it a nice cheesy flavour as well as our kumara and our potatoes. Alright, so my bacon and onion are ready to go. So all I do now is I spread those just out over the top of the ingredients. And again, if you are choosing not to eat meat for either religious purposes or vegetarian, then you could leave the bacon out of this and we end up with a vegetarian dish. If you don't eat cheese, and of course you can leave the cheese out and just end up with your white sauce. So that again is thickened up nicely, so I'm just going to take it off the heat, add in our grated cheese, remove our whisk, go back to our wooden spoon and just stir in that cheese. And I'm not too concerned if that cheese doesn't melt completely into the sauce, because we're going to pour it all the way over the top of our potatoes. Now, one last thing is just add some chopped fresh herbs, in this case parsley, to our sauce. So now we can pour that all over. So again, for those that have been following the series Cooking for Teenagers, you'll notice that it's a similar process to our fish pie that we made earlier on. So get all that nice sauce out. Just spread that around just over the top, just to make sure it's just covered. And then we take our fresh breadcrumbs and be quite generous with these. They're going to brown up nicely, they're going to have a nice little crunch and a nice little sort of texture to the top of our kumara and potato bake. And that would go into a hot oven, 200 degrees, and that's going to take around about half an hour just to actually get those ingredients heated up and finished off on top. And so here's what we started with. We'll leave that there to give it some height. So there is our wonderful kumara and potato bake. You can see the nice crispy breadcrumbs on top. You don't get that effect if you're using the dried ones, but you could if you didn't have any fresh bread to actually put through a food processor to create them. So again, really healthy and nutritious by itself with a nice salad, or use that as part of a starch dish to go with your sausages you might be having for tea, or your mince or your lamb chop or something along those lines. So you've been in the kitchen with Scott doing Cooking for Teenagers. I'll see you next time.